I didn't even know his real name. Not when I kissed him. Not when I let him hold my heart like it was something weightless. He said he was just passing through. I wanted to believe that meant he'd come back. But he left, and when he did, he took something I didn't even know I'd have to give away. Alone. The test turned pink. The silence turned sharp. And that's where the story should have ended. But royalty never leaves quietly, and love, when it returns, never knocks. It was raining that night. The kind of rain that didn't care to perform. No thunder, no lightning, just a soft, relentless tapping against the windows, like it wanted to be let in. The apartment was too quiet, no music, no tea, not even the lamp turned all the way up. Just me, sitting in that gray-blue kind of dark, holding the test like it might change if I stared hard enough. 2 lines. Faint, but there. One for the life I already had, and one for the one I hadn't planned. I didn't cry. I thought maybe I should, that maybe if I cried it would feel more real, or at least like something I could survive. But I didn't. I just floated. Numb, I guess. Or maybe that strange stillness your body finds when your heart's making too much noise to keep up. He wasn't here. That was my first clear thought. He wasn't coming back. No matter how many times I counted the weeks or tried to remember if he'd ever actually said goodbye, he hadn't. Not really. He left like the tide, slow at first, then suddenly gone. And me? I was the shore, waiting, eroding, pretending I wasn't. I'd been left before, by people who were supposed to know better. I'd gotten good at patching things up on my own. The heart, the bills, the grocery lists, the broken promises. So I told myself this wouldn't be any different, that I could handle it the same way I handled everything else, alone, quietly, without asking for anything I couldn't give myself. But there was something in the way the rain kept whispering against the glass, something in the silence between each breath, like even the room knew I was lying. Still, I said it out loud, just once, just to make it true. I'll be fine. And for a second, I almost believed it. It's strange how some memories come back in bursts, like sunlight slipping through a dusty window, sharp and warm, even when everything else feels cold. I remember that summer, bright in my mind, though back then it felt more like a blur. I wasn't ready to tell you this part before, but I think I have to now. He wasn't just a shadow passing through. He was sunlight on my skin, the kind of warmth that makes you forget the chill, even after it's gone. We spent those days wandering through streets soaked in light, the world feeling too big and too small all at once. His laughter, quiet, a little hesitant but real, would float around us like it belonged nowhere else. I remember how it caught in his throat sometimes, like there was something he wanted to say but couldn't. There was this park bench we loved. The air smelled like cut grass and something sweet I never learned the name of. He'd rest his hand over mine, fingers barely touching, and I'd pretend that silence was the same as saying everything. He never talked much about where he was from or where he was going. I didn't ask. Not at first. Maybe I was scared of the answer. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, dappling his face in gold. I thought about tracing each patch of light, memorizing them, as if I could hold on to that moment forever. But light fades, even the brightest. He would watch me sometimes, not with words, but with a kind of quiet attention that felt like the first time you realize you want to be seen. And maybe that's why I let myself believe in the nothingness between his words. Because being seen, even in silence, felt like enough. But beneath that warmth, there was always a shadow. The way he looked at the horizon, like it held a secret just for him. The nights he slipped away without a goodbye, leaving behind a space filled with questions I didn't know how to ask. I told myself that was just who he was, a man running from something, or maybe from himself. I didn't understand it then, not fully. I only know now that some summers don't last, not because the light leaves, but because you have to let it go. And still, even now, I can feel that warmth, like a mixtape stuck on repeat, one track soft and sweet, the next fading into something I wasn't ready to hear. It's funny how fear starts out quiet, almost invisible, like a shadow waiting to stretch out and cover everything. I didn't notice it at first. I thought I was just tired, maybe numb. But the truth was, I was scared. Scared of what the pregnancy meant. Scared of what would come next. Scared of being left alone again, like I always was. The questions kept looping in my mind, like a broken record. What if I'm not enough? What if he never comes back? What if I'm just fooling myself, thinking this could ever be more than a mistake, and beneath all that was something darker? The fear that maybe love was the thing that always left me empty. That maybe love itself was the risk I wasn't sure I could take again. Silence became both comfort and weapon. When he disappeared, the quiet stretched between us like a wall I couldn't climb. I wanted to reach out, to ask why, but the silence had its own kind of coldness. It made me feel smaller, fading into the background. Sometimes I wondered if he was running from me or from everything that tied him to this world. I remember the nights, lying awake, heart pounding, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing, if maybe I'd built something out of nothing. Then the panic would hit, sudden and sharp like a wave pulling me under. I'd tell myself to breathe, to stay calm, but fear never listens. It whispered that I was alone, that I was on my own, that I should start bracing myself for what was coming. I thought about calling someone, anyone, but the walls I'd built around myself felt too thick to let anyone in. Trust felt dangerous, like handing someone something fragile you weren't sure they'd want to hold. So I stayed quiet, letting fear grow in all the places words couldn't reach. Looking back now, I can see how that fear shaped me, how it locked me inside myself, protecting a heart already cracked too many times to count. It made love feel less like a gift and more like a liability. But back then, all I knew was that I had to survive it, whatever it was, alone. I wasn't ready to tell you this part before, but you needed to know how that silence almost swallowed me whole. It's strange, isn't it? How something as simple as a name can carry so much weight, how it can be a promise or a barrier. I never asked him his real name, not once. I think I was too scared to know it. Or maybe I thought that by not knowing, I could keep some part of him at arm's length. Like if I didn't have his name, he could never fully belong to me. And maybe that would protect me from getting hurt. I called him Alex. It felt safe, like a name borrowed from a book, something distant, something anonymous. But it wasn't his not really. And deep down, I think I knew that. I wanted to ask, to peel back the layers and find out who he truly was. But every time the words hovered on my lips, they just died there. Names are supposed to mean something. Trust, connection, a way of saying, you're here, and I see you. But with him, the silence around his real name felt like a lock on a door I wasn't allowed to open. Maybe I convinced myself it didn't matter, that what we had was enough without knowing every detail. But now, looking back, I realized that was the first brick in the wall I built between us. I wanted to be close, but I was afraid of being fully seen, afraid of falling too hard. So I held on to that distance, to the unspoken, hoping it would shield me from pain. Instead, it only left me lonelier. I wonder now, if I'd asked, if I'd pushed past the silence, would things have been different? Or was the secret of his name just a symptom of a deeper truth I wasn't ready to face? That maybe he was running, not just from a kingdom or a duty, but from himself, and from what loving me really meant. I wasn't ready to tell you this part until now, but it matters. The way a name can carry the weight of everything left unsaid. It took me a long time to say it out loud, even to myself, that love wasn't something beautiful I could lean on. It was a mistake, not the kind you make once and learn from, the kind you keep making over and over, like a wound that won't heal because you won't let it. I told myself I wouldn't fall again, wouldn't let anyone close enough to break what little was left of me. So I steeled myself, told myself I was enough on my own, that I could carry this, carry him, carry the child growing inside me without needing anyone else. The pregnancy wasn't just a complication. It was my cross to bear alone, because that's what I thought I deserved, to face it all in silence, behind walls I'd built so carefully. I practiced the mantra in my head, over and over. Love is a mistake. Love is a mistake. It sounded harsh, but it was the only truth that kept me steady when everything else felt like it was slipping away. I couldn't afford to want more, not when wanting meant risking everything again. Not when wanting meant opening the door to more loss. And yet, even as I told myself that, I knew it wasn't that simple. Because strength doesn't come without its shadows. The solitude I called refuge was also a prison, one that locked me inside a version of myself I barely recognized. Guarded, distant, afraid. I kept telling myself it was better this way, safer. But the truth whispered underneath it all, that I was lonely. Not the kind of loneliness you can shake off, the kind that lingers in the spaces between breaths, between words. I wasn't ready to tell you this part until now, but you need to understand, before all the fear and silence, I tried. I really tried to be strong, to protect what little I had left, even if it meant pushing away the only person who ever truly mattered. And yet, even with all that resolve, the question stayed with me. Was I strong enough to carry this alone? Or was I just too scared to ask for help? The rain hadn't stopped all day. It started early, soft at first like a whisper I thought I could ignore. But by nightfall, it was steady, unrelenting. A quiet percussion against the windows that seeped straight into my bones. I sat by the window, knees pulled to my chest, forehead against the cool glass. The apartment lights were off, except for the kitchen, one lonely bulb humming faintly, throwing thin shadows across the floor. I didn't bother turning it off. There was something about that dull glow, tired, stubborn, that felt familiar, like it understood the weight in the room. Outside, the streets shimmered under the rain, slick and silver, glinting when cars passed. I used to find nights like that comforting. Before, when Alex would sit beside me and trace lazy circles on my wrist. When he'd hum under his breath and I'd pretend I wasn't memorizing every note. We didn't talk much on those nights. We didn't need to. His silence didn't feel empty then. But now, every drop of rain felt like something unsaid. Something he left behind. I remember thinking, stupidly, that if I sat there long enough, he might walk back through the door. That maybe the universe would feel my wanting and take pity on me. I even imagined the sound of his voice. Low, tired, saying my name like a promise. He didn't. And the rain kept falling. There's a particular kind of grief that doesn't come with screaming or tears. It's quieter. The kind that hides in the corners of a room and waits for you to notice it. It lives in the routine, brushing your teeth, folding laundry, making tea you won't drink. I didn't cry that night. I just sat there. Let the quiet drown me. Let the rain blur the world outside into shadows and light. I don't think I wanted to feel better. Not yet. Sometimes the pain is the only thing that reminds you you're still here. But even in that stillness, something stirred. Something I didn't want to name yet, because if I did, it might expect something from me. Hope. That stupid, persistent thing. It always starts small, doesn't it? Like a breath you didn't know you were holding, a flicker of warmth in the middle of all that cold. I ignored it, told myself it was exhaustion, hormones, habit. But deep down, I knew. Something in me wasn't ready to give up entirely. Not yet. I think I would have left it buried if the drawer hadn't stuck. It was one of those small, stupid moments that mean nothing, until they do. I was on the floor, wearing sweatpants that didn't fit anymore, trying to make sense of the mess I'd let pile up. Unopened mail, random receipts, dead batteries. Nesting, I think they call it. But this wasn't preparation. It was distraction. Like maybe if I organized the outside of my life, the inside would follow. The drawer jammed halfway open. I yanked it, cursed under my breath, and when it finally gave, everything spilled forward. Ribbons of junk, pens that didn't work, a birthday card from someone I no longer spoke to. And then, I saw it. Thin black plastic, a handwritten label, faded but still legible, for the days that don't make sense. I didn't touch it at first, just stared at it, like it might vanish if I blinked too hard. But it didn't. It was the mixtape I made him. Alex, months before everything got complicated, before he left, before I knew what he was running from, before I knew he wasn't just some wandering stranger with quiet eyes and calloused hands, before I knew I was pregnant. I don't even remember what songs I put on it. Just sitting on this same floor, headphones tangled in my hair, recording each track like it mattered. Like maybe, if I got the order right, he'd understand everything I couldn't say out loud. The tape had been shoved all the way to the back of the drawer, behind expired coupons and a flashlight that only worked when you shook it. I kept it in the place where I put things I couldn't throw away, but couldn't look at either. The things that mattered. The ones that hurt. My fingers hovered over it like it might burn me. It didn't. It just sat there, weightless and heavy all at once. I don't know what made me pick it up. Maybe the way the label was smudged at the corner, like someone, maybe me, maybe him, had once held it too tightly. Or maybe it was the silence in the room, begging to be filled with something that wasn't just my own thoughts. I turned it over in my hand, my thumb tracing the edge like it might open a door back to when things were simpler. Before I told myself I didn't need anyone. Before I learned that loving someone didn't mean they'd stay. Without thinking, I pressed it to my chest. Just for a second. Just long enough to feel that sting behind my eyes. I didn't cry. Not then. But something cracked. Not enough to flood me. Just enough to let a little light in. And here's the part I wasn't ready to admit until now. I wanted him to hear it. Even now. Even after everything. Some part of me, buried just as deep as that drawer, still believed maybe he would listen. That maybe the words I never said would find him anyway. I wasn't ready to call it hope. But I held that tape like it might still matter. And for the first time in weeks, I found myself thinking, not about how to let go, but about how to let something go out into the world, even if he never heard it, even if it came back unopened, even if it didn't fix anything, because maybe this wasn't about answers. Maybe it was about speaking in the only language I had left, music, memory, silence between songs. I set the tape down gently on the table beside me, and I started to plan how to give it back, not to get him back, just to be brave enough to send something into the silence, to say I was here, I felt this, I loved you once, and maybe I still did, or maybe I just missed the version of me who had. I didn't act on it right away. The tape sat there for a full day, maybe two. I moved it from the table to the counter, then to the bookshelf, then back again. Like it might start humming if I just found the right spot, like it might give me permission. I kept glancing at it while I made tea, folded laundry, tried to eat without tasting anything. Part of me was waiting for a sign, some cosmic green light to say, yes, it's okay, you're allowed to still care. But nothing came, just morning light through the curtains and more silence. So I made my own sign. I found an old padded envelope in the drawer beneath the sink, the kind you buy in bulk and never use until suddenly you need to send a piece of yourself out into the world. I slid the tape inside carefully, like I might bruise it if I moved too fast. Like it wasn't just plastic and ribbon, but something alive. Something sacred. I thought about writing a note. I even held a pen for a long time, fingers tight enough to smear ink across my palm. But what was I supposed to say? Here, this is what I felt. Listen if you want. Don't if you can't. No, that was too much, and somehow not enough. So I sealed it without words. Just the tape. Just the feeling. There was an ache in the quiet that followed, the kind that sits low in your chest and doesn't leave, even when you breathe through it. I wasn't crying, but my body remembered how. And maybe this sounds strange, but packing that envelope felt like lighting a candle, small, trembling, barely enough to see by, but still something alive. Something that said, I still have a voice, even if it shakes. I didn't take it to the post office. I knew exactly where it needed to go. The cottage was still there, the one he'd rented, tucked at the edge of town where the woods start to lean in close. He'd only lived there for a few months, but it still held his shape in my memory. The creak of the steps, the chipped blue paint on the mailbox, the porch light that flickered like it couldn't decide if it wanted to stay on. I hadn't been back since he left. I don't even remember driving there. Just the feel of the envelope in my lap, the car idling, my pulse loud in my ears. The cottage looked smaller than I remembered, and lonelier. The windows were dark. Overgrown ivy clung to the walls like it was trying to keep the place company. No car, no sound, just that heavy stillness that makes you forget what warmth feels like. I sat there for a long time. Not waiting for him, I knew better. Maybe waiting for myself. For the version of me brave enough to step out of the car, to walk up those steps, to leave behind something that still mattered. When I finally did, the gravel crunched under my shoes like it wanted to remind me I was real. The air smelled of pine and cold earth. It hit me how he used to smell like that too, wild and grounded, tired in a way he never explained. The mailbox stuck when I opened it. Of course it did. Everything in this story sticks. I slid the envelope inside. It barely fit, and then I just stood there, not expecting anything, not pretending this would fix what unraveled between us. Just letting the gesture mean what it meant, that I still carried it, that I was learning to let it go without pretending it didn't matter. The wind picked up as I stepped back, brushing the hem of my coat, rustling the trees like they were whispering secrets. I didn't feel relief. What came instead was a quiet steadiness, the kind that feels like stitching, slowly from the inside out. When I slid that envelope into the mailbox, it felt like pressing a fragile hope against glass, something that could shatter with one wrong move, but might also catch the light and glow from the other side. The chipped blue paint was rough under my fingertips, the metal cold. It creaked shut, like the house itself was sighing, remembering him. Remembering the way he'd come home late, carrying the weight of a whole kingdom in his pockets, pretending it wasn't there. I stood there longer than I meant to. The air was thick with pine and something else, maybe old memories, maybe silence itself. No one came. No one was waiting. Just the wind moving through the trees, trying to carry my small offering somewhere I'd never see. I didn't expect Alex to come back. Not really. But leaving that tape felt like a promise, that even when everything was uncertain, I still had the courage to reach out. Even if it was the quietest way possible. I turned away, gravel crunching beneath my boots, dusk settling like a soft blanket I wasn't ready to lift. And as I walked down the overgrown path, I kept wondering, was this the beginning of something? Or just my way of saying goodbye without saying a word? Walking away, the gravel whispered under each step. Dusk folded itself around me, blurring the trees, making the world feel both smaller and endlessly wide. I kept turning the gesture over in my mind. Was the mixtape really for Alex? Or was it for me? A quiet way to say, I'm still here. I still feel something. Maybe it was a promise that I hadn't completely closed the door. Not yet. The air smelled like pine and faint rain. I thought about how the cottage stood empty now, a shell of what could have been. The silence wasn't dead, it was waiting. I wondered if the wind might carry that tape somewhere, if Alex would ever hear those songs and understand. Or if it would just sit there, untouched, like a letter to a ghost. I didn't know if this was closure or the start of something new, some softer kind of ache. But I kept walking, the path darkening beneath my feet, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't know if that was a bad thing. That's where I left it, caught between hope and surrender, not ready to let go, not brave enough to hold on. The mixtape, the one I'd slipped softly beneath the bookstore door, hoping it might find its way to him, stayed there, unopened, untouched. Days passed. Morning light stretched through the windows, hitting that little space on the floor where I imagined the tape waiting for someone to notice. But nothing changed, just quiet. I remember the moment I realized it hadn't moved. I was behind the counter, surrounded by the scent of old paper and dust, when my eyes drifted down to that corner. The tape sat there like a small, mute plea no one had answered. I swallowed hard. The hope that had been flickering in my chest fizzled out like a candle in the wind. I reached down and touched it. Cold plastic. Stillness. No note. No sign. The silence was loud, louder than any words he could have said. And that silence broke something inside me. I'd thought maybe the songs could speak where I couldn't, that they'd reach him somehow. But instead, the silence swallowed them whole. I felt like a ghost in my own story, invisible, unheard. The bruised part of me that dared to hope curled in on itself, hiding where it couldn't be heard again. I kept wondering if he even knew it was there, or if the world had already moved on, leaving me behind, just a whisper lost in the noise. And in that stillness, I started to build walls again. Not out of anger, not yet, but out of the ache of being unseen. The silence didn't just hurt, it burned. A deep, twisting burn that settled under my skin, into my bones. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe he was busy, distracted, maybe even afraid. But as hours bled into days, the silence became something else, a verdict, bitter. That's what it tasted like. Sharp, unpleasant, impossible to swallow, like the last sip of bad coffee. I felt erased. Like the tape, like the message, like me didn't even exist in the space he'd once occupied. It wasn't just rejection. It was being pushed into a shadow where no one looked, no one cared. I caught myself snapping at a customer once, words sharper than intended. "No, I don't want that book," I said. "You think I'm just sitting here waiting for a prince to show up and fix everything?" Hollow words even as they left my mouth. I started building walls, not the towering kind from stories, but quiet, stubborn ones that bricked themselves up every time hope dared to peek through. Sharp edges, suspicion, protection. Vulnerability felt like a mistake. I wondered if he'd forgotten me already, or if I'd ever been real to him at all. Maybe I was just a story he told himself to pass the time, nothing more than a whispered secret like the mixtape gathering dust. I couldn't let myself want him anymore, not until I understood what silence really meant. And that's when the bitterness settled in, like a second skin I couldn't shed. After the silence came doubt, a whisper beneath the ache of rejection, growing insistent, gnawing. Did he ever really care? Or was it all just a story I told myself to fill the quiet? I tried to hold on to the warmth I felt, but the edges frayed. His laugh, genuine? His fingers brushing my hair, tenderness, or just habit? Every memory felt hazy, like looking through rain-streaked glass. I couldn't trust it. I couldn't trust him. Sometimes I replayed conversations in my mind. His voice shifts each time, softer here, sharper there. Was he distant, or was I imagining it? A puzzle with half the pieces missing, and the ones I had didn't fit. Was the man I loved real, or just a shadow I chased in the dark? I asked myself again and again. Was it love, or loneliness dressed up like love? The more I reached, the more the memories slipped away, leaving only doubt. And that doubt, it's a kind of ache all its own. The bookstore, my sanctuary, began to feel different. Thinner walls, windows that didn't protect. Not the cold drafts or long shadows, something else. A presence curling tight in my stomach, whispering that I wasn't alone. At first, I blamed myself. Loneliness twisting nerves into knots. Then I noticed. A footstep out of sync, a silence where a greeting should be, a glance lingering just a little too long. I told myself I was imagining it. Paranoia is cruel when you're raw. The familiar smell of old paper and coffee turned heavy. The bright spines of books seemed permanent, mocking. Floorboards creaked like warnings. Even the cat, usually lazy on the windowsill, was restless, alert. The quiet I once craved became a weight pressing down, safety slipping through fingers, and all I had left was the sense that someone out there knew more than I did. Things I hadn't uncovered. That, more than anything, made the walls close in, the air thin, the silence loud. It hit me suddenly, when the day faded and night stretched wide, how real it all was. Not just the baby growing inside me, but everything that came with it. The future, once blurry, sharpened into a jagged shape I wasn't sure I could hold. Heavy in my bones, thick fog in my lungs, pressing down. I sat on the edge of the worn couch in the back room, afternoon light slicing through the dust. I touched my belly, afraid that moving too fast might shatter the world. Or me. The life inside wasn't a secret anymore. It was a promise and a threat tangled together. The silence in the room felt enormous, waiting to swallow me whole. I imagined raising a child alone, shield and sword, protector and guide. Quiet nights when I couldn't stop the dangers creeping in, but would have to hold them back anyway. The thought twisted in my chest, raw and relentless. And yet, amid despair like a tide pulling me under, I found something stronger. Not hope. Not yet. A thin thread of determination. Because this wasn't just about me. It never had been. I wasn't ready to tell you this part before, but now, seeing what lay ahead, uncertain, terrifying, real, I knew I had to stop running, even if it meant standing alone. After the silence swallowed me, I retreated. From the world, from everything inside me. A wall, cold and high, around the part of me that still felt. Freeze beneath my skin. I stopped reaching, hoping, expecting. The bookstore, the city, even the baby, they all felt distant, like scenes behind thick glass. I went through the motions, heart elsewhere, wrapped in numbness. The night pressed in, sharp and brittle. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It weighed, sealing everything shut. No tears, no anger, just cold stillness. Shutting down was survival. Feeling meant opening to pain. I stopped waiting for answers I knew wouldn't come. I stopped looking for him. The truth. I let go of everything I thought I needed just to keep myself from breaking. Memories came in pieces, like shards slipping through fingers. Sometimes his hands, rough and warm against mine, the last real touch before everything blurred. Other times, only silence, swallowing rooms, making me question if he'd ever been there at all. One night, or two, I remember rain tapping on the roof, steady, soft. He sat by the window, shoulders hunched, staring out but seeing nothing. I wanted to reach for him, pull him back, but my voice caught. I just sat there, pretending the world hadn't shifted beneath us. Fragments. A laugh that didn't reach his eyes, his trembling fingers brushing a strand of hair, the quiet, "I'm sorry," that felt like a promise I wasn't ready to believe. The days before he left, a mixture of warmth and cold, sunshine tangled with shadows. I wanted to ask where he was going, but the words tangled. I watched his back disappear down the alley, space growing until he was a ghost on the street. The last moments, I can't remember. My mind blanks, protecting me from something too heavy. Edges frayed, center missing. Sometimes in the quiet, I catch a scent. His cologne mixed with rain, faint on my coat, and it pulls me back. Into the gap between memory and loss where I'm still waiting, still hoping, even if I don't know what for. Remembering means reopening wounds I wasn't sure would heal. But now, it's the truth I live with. The pieces I'm still trying to fit together, hoping someday they'll make sense. There was a time when I thought maybe, just maybe, I could tell my family. Maybe they'd understand, or at least try. But every time the words hovered on the edge of my lips, the weight of what it meant pressed down harder. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, the one with the chipped corner where Mom always said I'd leave my mark on the world. The silence between us was thick, heavy, like dust settling on old wood. I wanted to say something, anything, but I just stared at the fading paint and the cracked mug in my hand. What would they think? I asked myself. Would they see me as the scared, broken girl hiding a secret? Or worse, as the failure I feared becoming? The fragile image I'd worked so hard to keep would shatter if I spoke. I thought about telling my sister. She was always the one who said, family is forever. But even she had her own battles, and I was terrified my truth would be another weight she couldn't carry. So I swallowed the words, folded them into silence, and built a wall between us. There were nights when loneliness sat beside me, a quiet companion whispering that I was utterly alone, that even those who loved me couldn't reach me here. And maybe they couldn't, not yet. I wasn't ready to be that vulnerable. Not with them. Not when every glance felt like a question I couldn't answer. I wanted their support, yes, but I was more afraid of their disappointment, of the unspoken judgment that might follow. So I kept my secret close, tucked behind guarded smiles and careful words. The silence became both a shield and a prison. Looking back, I see how much that silence shaped the path I walked alone, how the fear of exposure kept me locked away, even when all I wanted was to be seen. The rumors started almost as soon as I returned to the bookstore, swirling like a storm no one could see but everyone felt. They didn't always say my name out loud, but the sideways glances, the abrupt pauses in conversation, the shadows stretched longer and tighter every day. I caught snippets, fragments drifting through the air like dust. That girl with the prince's child? Can you believe it? Someone muttered, sharp, low, meant to be heard but not acknowledged. Another whisper, close enough to make my heart thud, she should just disappear before it ruins us all. The bookstore, once my sanctuary, became a pressure cooker of eyes that never quite looked at me, but never stopped watching. I wasn't just a woman with a secret anymore. I was the story itself. The scandal everyone needed, but no one wanted to name. Sometimes, an old regular's glance flickered between sympathy and judgment, like they didn't know whether to comfort me or cross the street to avoid the trouble I carried. I hated that loneliness more than the silence in my own heart. It was heavy, suffocating, alive. I remember standing behind the counter, overhearing a conversation in the next aisle. He's not who he seemed, someone said. Royal blood means nothing if he's running from his duty. Another voice answered, and what about her? What's she hiding? What's she really capable of? They didn't know I was just inches away, but the words cut sharper than any blade. I kept my head down, pretending the whispers were background noise. But inside, anxiety curled tighter each day, like walls closing in, like the safe world I'd built was cracking. I wasn't sure who was watching or what they wanted. Pity? Contempt? Fear? Or worse, the slow erasure of everything I was, right there in the open where I thought I belonged. Sometimes, when the store emptied and silence returned, I wondered if the rumors were the real danger, or if it was the way they made me feel utterly alone. Sometimes, the loudest voices are the ones you never hear, but their weight is impossible to escape. After the rumors settled like thick fog, something shifted inside me. Not all at once, but like a stone sinking slowly into deep water. The bookstore, the one place I thought I could hide, became a cavern echoing with absence. Faces I once recognized now felt distant, like ghosts of people I used to know. I'd nod politely when someone stopped by, But the warmth was gone, replaced by a polite distance that made me feel less like a person and more like a story they were done reading. I remember the silence more than the noise. The shop grew quieter, not because no one came in, but because even the few who did felt like strangers. Sometimes I'd stand behind the counter, tracing the chipped edges of worn book covers, listening to the tick of the clock, the hum of the city outside, anything but the quiet in my chest. One afternoon, late in the golden stretch of dusk, I realized I hadn't spoken more than a handful of words all day. The cashier who usually brought me coffee stopped coming. The old woman who loved poetry didn't show up. Even the small kindnesses that had felt like lifelines were fading. I told myself it was for my own good, that walls kept out the cold, kept out the hurt. But those walls weren't just shields, they were cages too. I was trapped inside my own silence, a scream curled in my throat. I could feel myself withdrawing, shrinking into the smallest version of me I could manage without disappearing completely. The exhaustion wasn't just physical, it was a deep kind of loneliness that no amount of busy work could fix. And yet, in that hollow place, something strange grew. Not hope, not yet, but a fierce, quiet resilience. The kind you build when you have no choice but to stand, even if your legs tremble. The kind that whispers, "You are still here. You will keep going." I wasn't ready to tell you this part before, because admitting the loneliness meant admitting how close I came to giving up. But here's the truth. It was in that isolation, that sharp, aching solitude, that I found the first flickers of my own strength. Sometimes, the only way to protect yourself is to face the silence and say, "I'm still here. I'm still standing." And that's how it began. I don't usually tell this part. It's not something I get to choose. It's one of those moments where duty clenched its fist around everything I wanted, everything I could feel. They sent the handler that day. Not someone I knew well, just a shadow in a suit, all sharp lines and cold eyes. The kind of person who moves like they're ready to extinguish a flame before it's even sparked. When he appeared, the air in the room shifted, smaller, heavier, tighter. I had the mixtape with me, the one Lena made. I wanted to keep it close, a tether to a world outside this cage of obligations and secrets. But the handler's voice was steady, measured, final. "You must sever contact," he said. No questions, no room for negotiation. His hand took the mixtape without hesitation, sliding it back toward me as if it were poison. There was a moment, a breath when I wanted to resist, to fight the quiet command. But I was tangled in a web far beyond what I could unravel alone. Frustration burned beneath my ribs, hot and sharp, but it had no voice, only silence. I swallowed the anger. For their eyes, for the kingdom, for the weight I carry, I was a prisoner dressed in fine clothes, a prince without freedom. The handler turned and left without a backward glance, taking with him the small hope I'd held onto. In that room, with the door closing behind him, the distance grew, not just between me and Lena, but between who I was and who I was meant to be. The mixtape gone, the chance to reach her slipping further into shadow. And still, somewhere deep inside, a part of me refused to be silenced. They came for me just after dusk, when the shadows began swallowing the edges of the day. I knew they were coming, though I hadn't wanted to believe it until the heavy knock shattered the fragile quiet of my hiding place. 2 guards, faces unreadable, hands firm enough to remind me I was no longer the man I thought I was. No more prince, no more freedom, just a prisoner, bound by invisible chains heavier than iron. They didn't speak much. The handler, that same shadow in a suit, watched like a hawk, eyes sharp enough to cut through resistance. I wanted to fight, to break free, but what good is a fist against a kingdom's will? As they moved me through narrow corridors, every step echoed in my chest like a countdown. Desperation tangled with simmering anger I wasn't allowed to express. I swallowed it down, locked it behind a wall built of duty and helplessness. The cold air bit through my clothes when they forced me into a small, dim cell. No windows, no light, but what slipped through the barred door. A cage for my body and my soul. I sat on the hard stone floor, silence pressing like a weight. I thought of Lena, how far away she must be, how the distance between us grew wider with every hour. And the mixtape, gone from my grasp, a quiet symbol of the life and love I was fighting to hold on to. Alone, bound, but not broken. Not yet. I used to think the worst kind of silence was the one that followed a fight. when the air still buzzed with unsaid things, and neither of you was brave enough to break it first. But it wasn't. The worst silence is the kind that feels final. Like absence turning permanent. Like your name being dropped from someone's mouth one last time and never spoken again. Like maybe you never existed at all. That's what it started to feel like. Not just that he was gone, but that I was being erased right alongside him. Me, us, everything we had been, and the child growing inside me. Some nights, I'd press my palm against my stomach and whisper his name just to hear it aloud, to remind myself it had happened, that he had been real, that I had been real to him, that this child wasn't some ghost story or a mistake scribbled out of a royal ledger before it was even written. But what terrified me most, what hollowed me out completely, was the thought that no one would ever know. That my child would grow up not knowing they were loved before they even arrived. That they'd be born into a world that had already decided to forget them. And me most of all. Because when someone like Alaric disappears, the world protects him. It shields his story, wraps it in gold and silence. But when someone like me disappears, no one writes it down. No one remembers. They just shake their heads, lower their eyes, and say things like, "She was foolish to begin with." And maybe I was. Maybe I should have known better than to fall for a man who had secrets stitched into his name. But I loved him. Not the title, not the crown I didn't even know existed. Him. And I was still here, still breathing, still holding on to the weight of this child who hadn't even opened their eyes yet, but already carried so much silence on their shoulders. I didn't want to disappear. I didn't want this baby to be born into a void, into a story no one was allowed to tell. That's when the fear started to turn into something sharper. Not rage exactly, but refusal. A refusal to vanish. Because even if the kingdom wanted to forget me, even if Alaric had been pulled into some cold, unreachable place, I wasn't gone. And neither was this child. We were still here, still waiting, still real. There comes a point where grief stops being a weight and starts becoming a weapon. Not one you use to hurt someone else, but one that helps you stand up straighter. The kind that teaches you the shape of your own spine. That's what happened to me. Slowly, quietly, not in some loud, cinematic breakdown where I screamed into the rain or packed a suitcase with shaking hands. No. One morning, I just woke up and didn't cry. I made tea. I made toast. I sat on the floor and ate both with my back against the counter because the chair still reminded me of him, and I thought, this is still my life, even if it wasn't the life I planned. Even if I had to carry it alone. I didn't stop being scared. God, no. I still flinched every time the phone rang or someone walked too slowly past the bookstore window. But I realized something no one had ever taught me. You can be afraid and still choose. So I chose. Not because I was brave, but because every other option hollowed me out completely. I chose to stay. I chose to hold on to the truth. I chose to be the kind of mother who wouldn't flinch, even if the whole world wanted her to. I started writing things down. Little things at first, scraps of memory. Things I wanted the baby to know. About their father. About me, before all this. About the way he laughed when he didn't mean to. About the song that was playing the first time I told him I liked him. Not out loud, just in my head, because the words felt too big then. I wrote down the things no history book would ever care about. The things no official record would keep. I was going to make sure this child knew where they came from. I wasn't going to let them feel erased, even if I still did. And maybe that was the shift, the slow, steady turning of something inside me, from fear to fire. I stopped waiting for someone to save us. I stopped asking the silence for answers. Instead, I started making plans. I began saving money, filed for a new apartment closer to the train station, just in case. Found a midwife who didn't ask too many questions. Kept the bookstore open, even when the customers thinned and the whispers thickened. Because I was still here, and I wasn't going anywhere. Let them try to pretend we didn't exist. Let them try to scrub me out of the story like a smudge in the margins. I'd write it myself, in ink they couldn't erase. It wasn't the life I thought I'd have. It wasn't love wrapped in warmth and certainty, but it was mine. And that was enough to keep going, at least until the letter came. The one with no return address. The one written in a handwriting I'd memorized long before I knew his real name. It wasn't the envelope that stopped me. It was the handwriting. Slanted, clean, too neat, like someone who'd learned to write under eyes that demanded perfection. I hadn't seen it in weeks, but my fingers recognized it before my eyes did, like muscle memory. Like the way a song you haven't heard in years can still undo you with one note. For a long moment, I just stood there in the hallway. The mail balanced in my hand, my thumb pressed over that one envelope like it might disappear if I didn't hold tight enough. No return address, no name, just my bookstore's name, just mine. I took it inside, locked the door. I didn't open it right away. I made tea I wouldn't drink, paced the kitchen in socked feet, telling myself it could be anything, a cruel joke, a trap, a stranger with similar handwriting. But I knew better. There are things you don't forget. The weight of a voice, the feel of a hand resting low on your back, right where it doesn't have to be, but always ends up, the shape of someone's name in your mouth, even after you stop saying it aloud. And that handwriting, I would have known it blindfolded. When I finally slid my finger under the flap and unfolded the paper inside, there was no declaration, no apology, not even a full sentence. Just a line of lyrics, 6 words, open quote, still listening, still yours, stay safe. Close quote. No signature, no explanation. But I didn't need one. I sat down on the floor with it in my lap and stared until the edges blurred, until the ink looked like it had been written underwater, until I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. Seen, not fully, not all the way, but enough to remind me I wasn't the only one still carrying this. It didn't erase the silence. It didn't undo the weeks swallowed by shadows and rumors. It didn't bring him back, but it meant he hadn't forgotten. He still remembered the song. He still knew how to find me. And maybe, just maybe, he was still trying. I wish I could say I believed it right away, that I clutched the letter to my chest and let hope bloom like something out of a storybook. But I didn't. I couldn't. Hope felt too much like a trick. So I tucked the letter between the pages of one of my notebooks, the one I'd started writing for the baby. I didn't tell anyone. Didn't change anything. Just kept showing up, pretending I hadn't received a whisper in the dark. But I read those words every night before I slept. Open quote, still listening, still yours. Stay safe. Close quote. They weren't a promise, they weren't a plan, but they were something. And at the time, that was enough, at least until I saw him again. Not in a dream, not in a memory, but standing in the doorway of the bookstore, looking older, looking wrecked, looking at me like he'd forgotten how to breathe. And I wish I could say I ran to him, that everything in me softened, that I forgave him before he said a word. But I didn't, because I wasn't the same girl he left behind. And he wasn't the same boy who'd made me a mixtape and asked for my favorite chapter. We were something else now, something harder, something real. And we were about to find out if that was enough. I remember that moment like a breath held too long, sharp, trembling, caught between disbelief and something else. The bell above the bookstore door jingled, soft but sudden, slicing through the afternoon quiet like a secret. I looked up before my brain could catch up. There he was, Alaric. No guards, no fanfare, no warning, just standing there, framed in the doorway like a ghost that had somehow learned to walk again. He looked older, tired in a way that softened him, made him look human again. His clothes were rough, plain, but his eyes, those steady, unyielding eyes, they caught me like a hook. I froze, heart folding in on itself. I wanted to ask 1,000 things at once, but my mouth wouldn't work. "Lena," he said, voice low, rough, unmistakably his. No grandeur, no apology, just my name, simple, but it landed like a question I wasn't ready to answer. The air shifted, dense, electric, like the moment right before a storm breaks. I blinked, trying to ground myself. This wasn't a dream. He was real, standing there, present, and everything in me screamed to run. But I stayed. Because sometimes, presence alone is the loudest thing there is. And in that breath, I saw him, not as a myth, not as a memory, but as a man who'd somehow found his way back. And I realized this was where the reckoning had to begin. I didn't know it yet, but this was the turning point, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what came next. I started to back away, my breath caught somewhere between fear and disbelief. Every instinct screamed at me to disappear, to vanish like a shadow at dusk. But before I could cross the threshold back to safety, his hand was there. Not grabbing, just steadying, gentle but firm. Lena, wait. His voice was softer now, a quiet plea tangled with the storm inside me. I wanted to pull free, to say no, to shut the door on this unexpected reality. Instead, I found myself rooted, caught between the urge to flee and the need to understand why he had come back. Alone, unguarded, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen before. His eyes didn't hold the usual distance, the usual guarded walls. There was something raw there, like he was exposing a fault line beneath all the silence. And maybe, just maybe, I wanted to see where it led. I swallowed the knot in my throat. "Why now?" I whispered. "After everything, why are you here?" He hesitated. The silence stretched long enough for my heart to pound a frantic rhythm. Then, with a breath like a cracked promise, he said, "Because I couldn't stay away." Simple, honest, unsettling, more than any secret could ever be. I didn't say anything. I let the silence hang between us, thick, trembling. Sometimes, words aren't what break walls. Sometimes, it's just presence. I remember the moment his hand touched mine, the weight of it, quiet but undeniable. For the first time, the walls I'd built didn't feel quite so impenetrable. He looked at me, really looked, and the armor was gone. Not a soldier, not a prince, just a man unraveling. "I didn't leave," he said, voice low, almost breaking. "I was taken." I blinked. The words hung between us like a thread pulled too tight. Taken? The word tasted strange on my tongue. By who? He swallowed hard, dragging something bitter up from deep inside. The palace, the council, his jaw clenched, but his eyes stayed on mine. They kept me hidden, not because I wanted to disappear, because they needed me gone. No grand speech, no excuses, just raw truth, trembling in the silence. I wanted to scream at him, to rage against the years lost, the silence forced on me, the empty spaces where answers should have been. But instead, I felt something shift. The anger cracked, letting in a sliver of something unfamiliar. Empathy. He wasn't a stranger who'd abandoned me. He was a prisoner, held captive by a crown neither of us had asked for. For the first time, I saw beyond the myth of the runaway prince. I saw the man who'd been stolen away, and the silence that wasn't his choice. In that moment, the story I told myself began to unravel. I didn't know what came next, but the truth, raw and unfiltered, had finally broken through. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of us finding a way back. I remember the moment he looked away, eyes tracing some distant line beyond the walls of the bookstore, as if weighing the weight of words he'd carried alone for too long. Then, almost without warning, he said it, quiet, raw, the kind of confession that shifts everything. "I'm not just Alaric." His voice cracked on the name, like it belonged to someone else entirely. "I'm the prince, the one they never wanted the world to know about." I blinked. My breath caught on a tremor I couldn't name. The idea felt like a thread unraveling a tapestry I'd been stitching from half-truths and silence. The man before me wasn't just the runaway I thought I knew. He was the kingdom's hidden heir, lost in shadow, secreted away by whispers and fear. "Prince?" The word felt foreign on my tongue, like trying on a crown too heavy for my head. "Why didn't you tell me? Why hide it?" He swallowed, eyes darkening with shame and something fragile. Trust, maybe. Because the council, the court, they said it was safer this way. Safer for me to disappear than risk what I represent. They wanted control, a kingdom without a reckless heir to interfere. I felt my hands clench. Anger flared beneath my skin. "So you were a prisoner, a secret they kept behind locked doors, and I was left waiting in the dark?" He didn't argue, just nodded slowly, as if every silent year was a chain he'd finally broken. "I never meant to leave you in the dark. I was caught between duty and fear, between who I was supposed to be and who I wanted to be with you." A quiet sorrow lingered in his words. The years of silence stung sharper, but also cracked open something deeper inside me, a fragile, trembling understanding. I wanted to scream, to demand everything and nothing all at once. But instead I listened, because for the first time, the man behind the prince, the one I'd loved, lost, and feared, was here, and the story wasn't what I thought it was. The moment the words slipped out, "I'm the prince," something inside me cracked wide open, like brittle ice beneath my feet giving way. For a beat, I just stared. The weight of his truth pressed down, suffocating and sharp. Then the flood came. Why? The word was jagged, sharp against the quiet. "Why did you keep this from me? From us?" He looked down, swallowed hard, but I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. You vanished. No warnings, no goodbyes, just gone. And all this time I spun stories in my head, wondering if I was the fool for waiting, for believing. Waiting for what? A ghost? A lie? His jaw tightened. He said nothing. Maybe there were no answers that could heal the hollow inside me. I needed you, not some hidden prince playing at shadows. I needed you, Alaric, the man who promised he'd stay. The anger bloomed like fire, hot and wild. Instead, you disappeared. And now, after everything, you expect me to just listen? To believe it wasn't your choice? He met my eyes then, raw and unguarded. I saw the weight of years in his gaze. No excuses, no defenses, just the ache of a man caught between duty and desire. I was trapped, he finally said, not just by them, by everything I was supposed to be, but I never stopped wanting to come back, to you. His words hung fragile as glass. I wasn't sure if I wanted to catch them, or shatter them, because truth isn't simple, it never is. That night I realized love, real love, wasn't just about holding on. Sometimes it's about facing the silence that follows, the spaces left unspoken, and deciding whether to step into the unknown anyway. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew one thing. I couldn't turn away anymore. Not now. Not when everything was finally out in the open. And that was terrifying. But maybe terrifying was exactly where we needed to be. We sat across from each other, the weight of everything still hanging between us, thick and raw. The bookstore around us felt both impossibly small and endless, walls pressing in, silence stretching out like a chasm we had to cross. Alaric didn't speak at first. He just looked at me, really looked, as if memorizing every line on my face, every flicker of hurt and hope. Finally, I whispered, "What did you want from me all this time, when you were gone?" He took a slow, steady breath, gathering pieces of himself scattered by years of silence. "I wanted to tell you everything," he said, voice rough but quiet, "but I was afraid the truth would push you away." Maybe that was the most honest thing he'd said yet. I let the anger soften, just enough to let the cracks show. I was afraid too, I admitted. Afraid I was holding on to a shadow, that I'd built this whole world around someone who wasn't really there. He nodded, eyes flickering with something like relief, or maybe regret. I never stopped needing you, even when I couldn't be there. For a moment, all I could do was breathe him in, the faint scent of rain on his coat, the quiet way his hands rested on the table like he was trying not to break. "Do you know what it felt like?" I asked, voice trembling. "To watch you disappear? To carry this secret alone?" I reached down, hand on the curve of my belly, where the life we'd made, unspoken, fragile, was growing. I was scared, Alaric, scared for both of us. He reached out, fingers brushing mine, tentative, steady. "I'm sorry," he said simply. No grand declarations, no excuses. Just a quiet truth, heavier than any apology. We sat like that for what felt like hours, words folding into silences, silences folding into understanding. Not perfect, not fixed, but something new. And maybe that was enough to start. I wasn't ready to tell you the rest. Some truths change everything, but I'll share it soon. Not yet, because sometimes the hardest step isn't saying the words, it's deciding to listen. That night, the dim light in the bookstore felt softer somehow. Shadows less sharp, the air warmer, even though the sky outside was bruised with storm. I shifted in my chair, suddenly aware of the curve of my belly, the way my shirt stretched just enough to show the secret I'd been hiding, from the world and from him. I could feel Alaric's eyes flicker, not with surprise, but with something quieter. Careful, maybe he was seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time since he'd come back. And maybe for the first time I was allowing myself to be seen. I swallowed hard. I didn't know how to say it before, I told him, voice low, almost breaking. I was scared that if I let this show, if I let anyone know, everything would come crashing down, that it would make things even harder between us. His gaze didn't waver. "You don't have to hide it from me," he said softly. "Not anymore." But it wasn't just his words I heard. It was the way he sat still, steady, like he was holding space for all the fears I hadn't voiced. I could almost hear the quiet thrum of hope beneath the silence, fragile but real. I rested my hand on my belly, feeling the tiny life stirring inside. "It's not just about us anymore," I said. The weight of that truth settled deep into my bones. "It's about the future, and I don't know if we're ready for what that means." He nodded slowly. "We don't have to have all the answers right now." For a moment, the world outside faded. The storm waiting patiently beyond the windows, the quiet city lights blinking on one by one, all that mattered was the space between us. The space where fear met courage, where silence began to break, and in that space, I chose to stay. Because sometimes, being vulnerable isn't giving up control, it's finding strength in the thing that scares you most. After I let the silence stretch between us, after I'd spoken the weight of what I'd been carrying, Alaric didn't rush to fill it with promises or apologies. He just sat there, hands folded loosely in his lap, eyes fixed somewhere beyond me, as if holding back something he couldn't say out loud. I could see it in the way his shoulders dropped, like the burden he'd carried for so long was finally easing, even if just a little. No grand confession, no dramatic apology, just quiet, steady remorse, settling into the space like a gentle tide. "It's not enough," I said quietly, almost to myself. "I needed you, and you weren't here. Not really." He nodded without argument, a flicker of sadness in his eyes. And in that moment, I realized that for all the things he couldn't say, his presence, this stillness beside me, was a kind of apology I wasn't sure I knew how to accept yet. He reached out, barely brushing my hand. It felt like a lifeline, not a rescue, not a fix, just a quiet promise that maybe, this time, he wouldn't disappear. I looked down at my belly again, feeling the flutter inside like a secret heartbeat between us. The world outside the bookstore, the storm waiting beyond the glass, all seemed distant. Here, in this fragile space, his quiet remorse was enough to begin. But I wasn't sure it would be enough to keep the storm from coming. I don't know how long we sat there, Alaric and I, just the quiet, the weight of what we'd said, what we hadn't yet said, hanging in the air like an unfinished song. But as minutes stretched, something began to shift. The tension that had built, the history, the fear, the silence, started to give way to something else. Not trust, not yet, but something close. The kind of understanding that comes when two people are simply present for each other, when there are no walls, only space. That fragile space felt a little less fragile, and I wondered, maybe this quiet moment, was the beginning of something new. Then, through the soft hum of the bookstore, I heard it. A rustle. At first, I told myself it was nothing, just the wind, maybe, or the storm outside picking up. But then I saw it. A shadow. A figure at the edge of the window, beyond the flickering light. I stiffened. My heart skipped, and Alaric, so still beside me, was suddenly alert, his gaze fixed on the same spot. His body tensed, hand moving instinctively as though he were about to stand. "No," I whispered, gripping his wrist. "Stay." His eyes flickered toward me, searching for something. For a moment, I thought he might argue, rise, confront whatever threat lurked outside. But instead, he nodded once, slowly, leaning in slightly. "Do you think they saw us?" His breath brushed my ear, the question heavy with the weight of everything we just confessed, everything still unspoken. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Somewhere in that moment, I knew. The storm outside wasn't the only one we'd face. Something darker, closer, lingered just beyond the window, the shadow of the kingdom, the threat of everything that wanted to erase us, to erase me. We weren't safe here. The figure outside didn't move, not yet. But the stillness was more dangerous than any noise. Alaric's eyes stayed locked on it, but something had changed. He was no longer the distant, unreachable prince I'd imagined. In that moment, he was just a man, trying to protect the little world we'd begun to build in this bookstore. His presence, quiet as it was, became a promise. No words, no grand gestures, just calm, unwavering presence. I wanted to ask what we were going to do, but the question felt too big, too risky. So I stayed silent, watching the shadow take form like a dark cloud rolling across the horizon. "Get ready," Alaric whispered, voice low now. His body moved with controlled urgency. He wasn't leaving, not this time. But he wasn't running either. We faced this together. The words felt like a promise, one I wasn't sure I was ready for, but one that steadied my trembling hands. The threat outside mirrored the one inside me. The fear of what might happen, the fear of what was already happening. There was no going back. We were too exposed, too far in to pretend the fragile bond we'd begun wasn't already being threatened. The door opened just a crack. Then the shadow passed. Everything was still. "Alaric," I whispered, voice hoarse, unsure what I was even asking. Afraid? Yes. But something else pulsed through me. A sharp, desperate need to protect this, our fragile connection, alive. To face whatever storm came, together. His eyes met mine. Something unspoken passed between us, something solid. The storm outside had nothing on the one we were about to face, the one that had already come knocking. The kingdom would try to tear us apart. But in that moment, it didn't matter. We would face it together. I think we both knew it wasn't over. The storm outside, the shadow, wasn't the only threat. But there was something in that quiet, in the way Alaric stayed by my side, that made me feel maybe we weren't powerless. It was small, like the faintest glimmer of light behind a cloud, but it was there. And for once, it was enough. I can't say how long we stayed side by side before the shadow drifted away. There was no resolution, no grand act that made everything okay. Just a pause, a moment where the world held its breath. Alaric didn't speak, neither did I. We let the tension settle into something more manageable, more familiar. Without words, we knew we had to choose. We couldn't hide in silence forever. It wasn't that we were magically okay, we weren't. The rough edges still existed, where trust didn't reach. But we'd built something in those quiet moments, a fragile bridge between us, one that felt more like a beginning than an end. Despite everything, the fear, the uncertainty, I felt it, the first soft thread of hope. I didn't trust him completely. Maybe he didn't trust me either. But we were trying, in the quiet, in the space where the weight of what was unsaid hung heavy. Finally, Alaric spoke, voice low and steady. "We need to leave soon." His gaze stayed on the door where the figure had been. Then he looked at me. Something new was there, something that hadn't been there before, a kind of understanding. "I'm not leaving you again, Lena," he added, almost to himself. "I don't know what this is, what we are, but I'm not going anywhere. Not now." I nodded slowly, not sure what to say. So much remained unspoken, so much we had yet to face. But for this moment, we had found a fragile agreement, a connection neither of us was ready to tear down. "You don't have to explain it all right now," I said, voice quieter than I expected. Strange, almost foreign, to speak so openly. But it was true, I didn't need answers. Not then, not from him. The words hung unsteady, like we were both teetering on the edge of something, not ready to leap. But maybe we didn't have to. Maybe this was enough, for now. "I think," I started, then stopped. My heart raced, not from fear, but something else, something unfamiliar. "I think we can take this one step at a time." Alaric didn't answer at first. He just stared, searching. Truth, trust, or something else entirely. Then he nodded. And that was enough. Not perfect. Far from it. So much we still needed to work through. So much left unsaid. But the bridge, the fragile, unsteady bridge, was there. For the first time, I felt it. Not just the weight of what had happened, or the burden of what could, but the quiet possibility of something new. In that fragile moment, I realized we were both still here. Neither of us had left. And maybe that was enough to hold on to. For now. It's funny, isn't it? How something so small can carry the weight of everything. I'd never thought of a sonogram as more than a picture, a snapshot of a moment, cold, clinical. But as I held it in my hands, I realized it wasn't just paper. Not for me. Not for him. Not anymore. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, letting the silence stretch, holding that thin piece of paper like it was fragile, like everything else right now. I didn't want to speak. The words didn't feel big enough. How do you tell someone they're going to be a father, especially when so much between you is broken, when all the things you should have said are still lodged in your throat? I watched Alaric reach for the sonogram. He didn't rush. His fingers moved slow, hesitant, like touching it might break it too. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something raw, something unspoken. It was like he was waiting for permission. Not to touch the picture, but to feel what it meant. And in that moment, I realized it wasn't just me carrying the weight of this. It was him, too. He didn't say anything. He just stared at the sonogram for a long time. No exclamation, no shock, no grand reaction. But I saw his chest rise, the faint hitch in his breath, and I knew that was enough. I wanted to ask him what he was thinking, to break the silence, force something into the space between us. But I couldn't. I didn't have the right to ask him to feel what I was feeling. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't about us. Maybe it was about him, about giving him the time to process, to decide what he was going to do with this. His voice broke the stillness, soft but steady. "How far along are you?" I took a breath before answering, letting the weight of the question settle over me. 6 weeks. His gaze lingered on the photo a moment longer before he placed it on the table between us. He didn't move away, didn't push it aside like it could be forgotten. He kept looking at it, and I felt it. We felt it. That slow, tentative connection. My hands trembled, a mix of fear and relief running through me. I wanted to say something, anything reassuring, but the words wouldn't come. I just nodded, silent agreement. He was here, he was seeing me, and that was enough. He cleared his throat. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, careful. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this, Lena. The honesty hit harder than I expected. Not an accusation, not a demand, just truth. And I realized something. Alaric wasn't pretending to know what to do. He wasn't pretending to be the man he thought I wanted him to be. He was just there, beside me in the quiet, and for the first time, I didn't need him to be anything more than that. I don't know either, I whispered, barely louder than the soft hum of the night outside. I just wanted you to know. Alaric didn't answer. He didn't need to. Instead, he reached out, his hand barely brushing mine before pulling away, unsure what was too much or too little. But it was enough. For a moment, neither of us moved. In that fragile silence, we understood something. We were both holding something we didn't know how to handle. But for once, it didn't feel like we were alone. I could feel his presence, solid, quiet, waiting for me to give him more. I wanted to tell him I needed him to stay, to try, but I didn't, not yet. Sometimes the hardest thing is just to stay, to keep showing up, even when you're scared of what comes next. I'm here, he finally said. Rough, but not a promise. Something softer, like he was speaking to himself as much as to me. I'm here, Lena, and I'm not going anywhere. I didn't know what to say, what to do with that reassurance, when everything in me screamed it couldn't possibly be true. But I nodded, my throat tight. There was tenderness in his words, and I felt it settle in my chest, warming the places that had been cold for so long. The room stayed still, the only sound our soft breaths. And in that moment, I felt something stir, fragile, like glass. Maybe it was too early to say it out loud, but I realized this. This was the beginning. Not of something perfect, not of an ending, but of a new thread between us, woven in silence and unspoken promises. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself believe it might be enough. For now. I woke to the smell of coffee, rich, comforting, wrapping the morning like a soft blanket. The world was still in the hush before the sun had fully woken. I didn't know how long I'd been lying there, trying to drift back to sleep, to let the weight of last night settle. But sleep felt distant, like a room without a door. The door to my apartment creaked open, followed by soft footsteps. I didn't need to turn around. Alaric stood in the doorway, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. Dim light caught the dark curls at his temple, almost bronze. He didn't speak. His presence was enough. You're up early, I said, sitting up slowly, the covers tangled around my legs. My voice felt rough, like I hadn't spoken in ages. He gave a small, shy smile. I wanted to be here when you woke up. He paused, setting one mug down on the table and the other carefully in my hands. I didn't want to leave without saying something. I stared at the steam rising from the mug, curling like a ghost. You don't have to do anything, Alaric. I wasn't sure if I was reassuring him or myself. He sat beside me, his knee brushing mine. The space between us felt both small and endless. His fingers curled around his mug, warmth visible in his grip. I know, he said quietly, but it's not about doing something. It's about being here. His voice, steady, sure, made something flutter in my chest. I expected him to run. Most people would have. But here he was, present. I sipped slowly, warmth spreading inside me. He remembered. The small things said more than words ever could. So, I said after a pause, quieter than intended, you brought coffees? Nice. I should have said more, something deeper, but I didn't. I leaned back, letting the moment linger. Alaric exhaled softly. I don't have the answers, Lena, he said slowly, carefully. But I can be here, for you, if you'll let me. I wasn't sure how to respond. His words shifted something inside me, something tight and closed, long dormant. Thank you, I whispered, too small, too inadequate, but it was all I had. We didn't speak much after that. The room stayed quiet, save for the hum of the fridge and the rustle of coffee cups. In the silence, there was something unspoken, a steady undercurrent we were both beginning to feel. This was the start of something new. fragile. I wasn't ready to rush it. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't need to. Maybe it wasn't about fixing everything at once. Maybe it was just about showing up. I'm not sure when it began, this shift. Maybe it was the small things, the quiet moments when I'd look up from the bookstore counter and see Alaric by the door, waiting with a cup of tea, or giving a brief, silent nod that said he understood how loud the world felt some days. Or the late afternoons, helping straighten shelves or take out the trash. Small acts of care, no questions, no demands. It wasn't that I was used to being cared for, it was the absence of expectation. I didn't have to be anyone other than me, and that in itself was a relief I hadn't known I needed. On days I couldn't keep my head above the weight of everything, the pregnancy, the whispers, I wasn't alone. Alaric was there, without a word, no fanfare. He never pushed for answers I wasn't ready to give. He just showed up. One evening, getting ready to close the shop, I saw him outside, leaning against the brick wall, arms folded. The light hit him like he'd always belonged here, even though I knew he hadn't. "Hey," I called softly, locking the door behind me. "I thought you were working late." "I finished up early," he said, gaze steady but kind. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. The simplicity wasn't the point. He was here because he wanted to be, and that meant more than any grand gesture. "Need any help?" I asked, gesturing to the stack of boxes. He didn't pressure me. "No, I've got it," I said, giving a faint smile. "But if you want to stay, I wouldn't mind the company." His small smile grounded me. His presence made the weight of the world feel lighter. He didn't need words. As I worked, he stayed, leaning against the wall, flipping through a book, just there. The quiet, the hum of lights, rustling pages, soft breathing, was something I didn't know I needed until it was there. When the last boxes were out, I realized how much his presence anchored me. I didn't feel the need to pretend everything was okay. I didn't feel like I was drowning anymore. "You didn't have to do this," I said softly, straightening from the last box. "I mean, I'm fine. I can handle it." "I know," he replied, "but you don't have to do everything alone." Something in me softened again. I wasn't used to relying on anyone, but there was nothing hesitant in Alaric. He didn't ask for anything in return. He simply did. For the first time in a long while, I let myself believe maybe this was the start of something steady, something real. The following days blurred into quiet routine. He came more often, not as a visitor, but as someone who belonged. Bringing coffee in the mornings, dropping off groceries, no declarations, no pressure, just presence. And bit by bit, I began to trust him, not just with my heart, but with the life I carried. Maybe that was the hardest part, to allow someone to care without expecting anything back. To open up, little by little, to lean into something that demanded only presence. It wasn't perfect. I wasn't perfect. But in that imperfection, there was something gentle, something real, something neither of us forced. "I'm not going anywhere, Lena," Alaric said one night on my porch, watching daylight slip behind the horizon. I hadn't asked, but the words still mattered. "I know," I whispered. "I don't think I am either." And for the first time in weeks, I believed it. I remember the mornings now, how simple they were. Not grand, not eventful, but in their quiet rhythm, they began to mean everything. I didn't expect perfection. If anything, I was still learning what it meant to just be with someone, without worrying about what I should say or whether I was too much or not enough. With Alaric, I didn't have to make up stories. I didn't have to pretend. The silence between us stopped feeling heavy. It became comfortable. Safe. It wasn't always the same time, but it was a rhythm we had fallen into. Some mornings, he'd knock on my door unannounced, tea in hand, and we'd sit at the small kitchen table. I'd be in an old sweater, hair still damp, and he'd look like he belonged, wrinkled clothes and all. "I brought the good tea today," he'd say, a quiet smile tugging at his lips as he handed me a mug, steam rising like an unspoken promise. "Good," I'd reply, curling my fingers around the warmth, letting it seep into my cold hands. I didn't know why it mattered so much, but those mornings, no pressure, no expectations, were becoming the most precious part of my days. The kitchen was small, cluttered with old mugs, books, half-finished projects. But the way Alaric would sit across from me, watching, listening without interrupting, made it feel like we were living in a tiny bubble of quiet. Even when I didn't know what to say, his silence never felt uncomfortable. It felt safe. We didn't talk about the baby every morning, or the whispers that followed me outside. No, we just existed, side by side. His eyes would sometimes drift to the window, catching the soft light, and I'd let myself enjoy the steady rhythm of his breathing. Alaric didn't need to be loud to make me feel seen. It was the little things, the softened gaze when he looked at me, the absent-minded brush of hair, the way he never rushed me when I lingered over my tea. I think he began to see me differently too. Not as someone to fix, not someone to save, just me. And maybe he didn't realize it, but I saw him changing too, making space for me, not just in his schedule, but in his life. The man who had once been so full of duty, of responsibilities, began to show up, just for me. Sometimes we spoke little, remarks about the weather, the latest book I'd been reading, the birds nesting outside the balcony, simple things. But those moments made me feel like I wasn't invisible, like I didn't have to hide my worries anymore. On the days the weight of everything, pregnancy, questions, whispers, pressed down on me, Alaric was there. Without words, just presence. And slowly I realized that maybe I could rely on him. Not because of who he was, but because of what he was willing to be. Just present. One morning, I reached for the last of the tea leaves and knocked over the sugar bowl. Crystals scattered across the table, sparkling like snow. I glanced at him, ready to apologize, but he just laughed softly. "Let me clean that up," he said, brushing the sugar into his hand. But it wasn't the cleanup that mattered. It was his laugh. Gentle, effortless. A sound that made everything feel lighter. "I didn't mean to make a mess," I said, catching his eyes. He shook his head, smile lingering. "You didn't." And for the first time in a while, I believed him. There was no mess. Not here. Not between us. We didn't need much more than that. No talk of the baby, the royal bloodline, or the whispers that shadowed me. Those mornings, the light through the window, the quiet hum of Alaric's presence, it was enough to remind me that maybe I wasn't walking through this alone anymore. I wasn't expecting it. Not after the silence, the distance, the walls I'd built so high I thought even I couldn't climb them. But those mornings with him began to unspool the tight coil I'd been carrying inside me. I remember sitting across from him one morning and feeling relieved. Not the relief of escaping danger, but something softer, like the weight I hadn't realized I'd been holding had shifted just enough to make the air easier to breathe. Vulnerability had always felt like weakness, a crack letting everything rush in, the fear, the judgment, the unknown. But with him, it didn't. It felt like a door left slightly open, inviting but not demanding. I watched him in the soft morning light, his eyes softened when they met mine. Posture relaxed, unhurried. No grand declarations, no rushing to fix. Just steady, quiet presence, louder than words ever could. And in that moment, I realized that this fragile ease between us was something I needed more than I'd been willing to admit. The world outside was still watching, still whispering. But inside that small space with steam rising from our mugs and the rhythm of our mornings, I let myself feel something I hadn't in a long time, safe. Maybe that's when the walls began to soften. Slowly, like frost melting under the first warm light of dawn. And for the first time in a long while, I let myself believe that vulnerability might not undo me. Maybe it could save me. I remember the first time he acknowledged me publicly. Not a grand gesture, no royal announcement, just something small, almost invisible. But I noticed. It was at the market square, a busy afternoon where faces blur and voices crowd the air. I was picking up bread and herbs, keeping my head down, avoiding curious glances. And then I saw him. Alaric, near the fountain, simple but carrying that quiet authority that made people notice without knowing why. Our eyes met. For a moment, the noise faded. He stepped closer, not like a prince claiming his place, but like a man who knew the weight of what he was doing. His hand slipped into mine, light as a breeze. It wasn't just touch, it was a signal, a claim, a promise. No words, no eyes searching for approval. Just a fleeting connection that said, "I see you, I'm here." And maybe it was foolish, maybe brave, but in that quiet I felt pride, the fierce, tender kind that hums under your skin. For so long I'd been invisible, a shadow, a secret tucked away. And then here he was, not hiding me, not shielding me, but making me visible, softly, undeniably. The world noticed. Whispers followed, cautious eyes, silent questions. But that acknowledgement, it was a start. Alaric didn't say, "This is mine." He didn't have to. His presence said enough. And deep down, I realized maybe we were beginning to face this together. Still, I wondered, was it enough? Could a single touch in a crowded square shift the tide, threatening to drown us both? Or was it just the calm before the storm? I can feel it still, the low, heavy murmur that followed us, whispers curling through streets, clinging to doorways, slipping between neighbors like smoke. They didn't say our names, but you could hear the pause, the quick intake of breath when we passed. Judgments wrapped in unspoken questions. It wasn't just the marketplace. At the bookstore, familiar faces glanced away when I met their eyes. At the cafe, the waiter's smile tightened, cautious. Mothers pulled children close, eyes darting toward Alaric. I wanted to shrink, disappear under the weight of all those silent accusations. But there was Alaric, steady beside me, a quiet anchor in a sea of uncertainty. One afternoon, a woman from the market approached me, her voice low, firm, eyes sharp beneath her hood. "Is he really here to stay?" she asked. "Or just passing through, like all the others?" I didn't answer. I looked at Alaric. He met her gaze and said, without hesitation, "I'm here," and so is she. No flourish, no royal proclamation, just those simple words, heavier than any crown. And I felt something shift, a fragile strength weaving through doubt. Later, when gossip reached our circle, friends hesitant to wade into royal scandal, we talked quietly. "Let them talk," he said softly. "They don't know what it means to choose." I nodded. I was beginning to understand. Our struggle wasn't just fear or judgment, it was carving a place where we belonged, together. Facing the storm, hand in hand, even when the winds howled loudest. But still, I couldn't help wondering, how long before the storm broke loose? And would we be ready? I remember the day I found the mixtape again, tucked behind a loose book on the old bookstore shelf. Dusty, edges worn, the label faded, but still legible in my handwriting, for when you need to remember. The irony hit me. How often I'd listened to those songs, not because they fixed anything, but because they made the silence feel less heavy. I held it there for a long moment, fingers tracing the plastic case like it was a fragile promise. The first time I'd touched something from before in a while. Before the whispers, before the fear, before knowing I was carrying something neither of us had planned for. That evening, when I showed it to Alaric, he didn't say much, just took it gently, like a relic from another lifetime, and maybe it was. He looked up at me, eyes soft, and I recognized it. His way of saying, "I'm still here." "It's strange," I said, voice low. "How a collection of songs can hold so much. Hope, or maybe just a kind of fragile faith that things might get better." He nodded slowly, flipping the tape over. "I never really understood why you kept it. I think I needed to believe in something I could hold on to, something small that reminded me there was light beyond all the shadows." He handed the tape back, and for a moment, I saw a flicker behind his usual reserve, something tender, like a quiet apology for the past, and a promise for what could still be. Later, when the night thickened around us, I found myself humming one of the songs. The melody curled around the corners of my heart that had started to unclench. We didn't say it out loud, but I think we both felt it. The mixtape wasn't just a memory. It was a map. A fragile anchor in the storm we were still learning to navigate. Maybe that was enough. But the question lingered, as always, could hope survive the weight of what was still coming? That evening, after the mixtape, after the comfortable silence, I found myself staring out the window, watching the last light fade from the sky. The future felt dark, uncertain. I was desperate to see it clearly and terrified of what I might find. Alaric sat beside me, quiet in that way that somehow spoke louder than words. Finally, I broke the silence. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" My voice was small, almost swallowed by the dim room. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair behind my ear, a gesture that had nothing to prove but everything to say. "I do," he said softly. "More than I should, maybe." I swallowed hard. I'm scared. Not just of what people might do, but what we might lose, if we can't trust each other, or if the weight of all this... I gestured vaguely to my stomach. "Breaks us." He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw the same flicker of fear mirrored back. But there was something else too, a quiet determination, like roots pushing through stone. We don't have to have all the answers. Not yet. But we can face it together, if you'll let me. I wanted to believe that was enough. to believe in us, even when the world outside seemed determined to pull us apart. I don't know what the future holds, I admitted, barely above a whisper. But maybe that's okay. He nodded, the weight in his eyes easing a little. Maybe the future is just an open space we learn to walk through, one careful step at a time. And in that moment, the fragility, the hope, the fear, we weren't pretending anymore. We were just two people, unsure but willing, standing on the edge of whatever was coming next. Still, the question lingered, how far could hope carry us when the shadows were so close? After that night, after speaking about the fragile unknown, I noticed something neither of us said aloud. It was there in the way our hands brushed on the worn armrest of the couch, in the quiet steadying of our breaths, a silent acknowledgement that we were no longer standing apart, but side by side. He looked at me then, gaze softer than I'd ever seen, not heavy with duty or expectation, just present. I'm afraid, he admitted, not just of what's coming, but of failing you, failing us. I nodded, afraid too, of the kingdom's shadows, of the life growing inside me, of fragile trust shattering under it all. I don't know if I can do this, I whispered. Not perfectly, not without falling apart sometimes. He curled his fingers around mine. Neither can I. But maybe that's what we're supposed to learn, to be imperfect together, to keep trying. A long pause settled between us, the kind where words fall away and something deeper takes root. Quiet hope, tentative and trembling, but real. I saw it in his eyes, felt it in my chest, a slow warmth spreading despite the cold outside. We're both scared, I said finally, but I don't think we're alone anymore. No, he said, voice low but certain. We're not. That night, with the darkness folding softly around us, I understood what trust could be. Not a sudden leap, but a careful hand held through the dark. We weren't fixed, and we weren't fearless. But we were here, together. The hardest part wasn't surviving what was coming. It was believing that maybe, just maybe, we could face it as one. And still, beneath that fragile hope, the question lingered. How far could two broken people carry the weight of a future no one else wanted to see? That evening, after the quiet promise we made, I slipped outside alone. The air was cool, dusk settling soft and slow, stretching shadows across the cobblestones like a gentle hush. My footsteps echoed lightly, and with each step, I felt the life growing inside me. Tiny, persistent flutters beneath my ribs, whispers only I could hear. Strange, how something so small could feel so loud. The baby moved again, sharper this time, like a secret knocking from within, reminding me that no matter how dark the future seemed, there was this pulse of something new, stubbornly alive. I pressed my hand against my stomach, feeling that slow rhythm, and it rooted me in a way I hadn't expected. Around me, the world shifted, leaves rustling, the faint scent of rain, the last pink traces of sunlight bleeding from the horizon. Inside, my body held its own kind of light, quiet but unbreakable. I didn't know yet what it meant to be a mother or how to carry the weight of what was coming. But for those few minutes, walking through dusk, I could hold on to this, the life that wasn't just a possibility anymore, but a presence. And somehow, that presence steadied the trembling edges of my hope. I kept walking, listening to the city's soft breath, the baby's steady heartbeat beneath my palm. Maybe that was enough to start with. But even as I felt it, I wondered, how do you protect something you can't yet see? After that walk, with the baby's movements still echoing beneath my palm, I found myself tangled in a new kind of thought, one that had nothing to do with fear or running or hiding. It was about love, what it really meant, beyond the stories we tell ourselves to feel safe. I used to think love was a sanctuary, a place where nothing could break. But the truth I was learning was messier, more fragile, and somehow more fierce. Love wasn't about safety. It was about choosing risk. Even when your hands trembled, even when the future looked uncertain, I thought about Alaric, the way he carried silence like armor, and still showed up, even when he didn't know if I'd let him stay. That was love, wasn't it? Not a shield, but a choice, to be vulnerable, to be seen, even if it meant breaking. I realized I had been holding my heart in a cage, keeping it small, quiet. But the baby inside me, life growing without permission or promise, was already breaking those bars. It demanded something bigger, something braver. Maybe love wasn't a place to hide from the storm. Maybe it was standing in it, hands open, willing to get wet, willing to risk everything for a chance at something real. For the first time in a long time, I let myself hope, not because I knew it would work, but because I chose to believe it could. But if love was a choice, what did that mean for me? For us? How do you keep choosing when the world keeps trying to pull you apart? I didn't have the answers, but I felt the stirrings of something new, a quiet courage whispering beneath the fear. Maybe that's where healing begins. But courage doesn't erase memory. It wasn't long after that night that something old stirred in me, something I thought I'd buried deep enough never to feel again. It came quietly, like most things that hurt the most. A dream, or maybe just a feeling clinging to me like damp air. I woke in the early hours, heart knocking against my ribs, the room too still. I reached for someone, anything, but my hand met only emptiness. And just like that, I was 5 years old again, standing in the kitchen doorway, staring at the space where my mother used to be. She left in the morning. Not the kind of leaving with doors slamming or shouted goodbyes. No, she left like silence, slow, unnoticed at first. I remember the cup of tea she didn't finish, her scarf still hanging by the door. I remember my father sitting at the table afterward, unmoving, as if staying still might bring her back. But she didn't. Not that day. Not ever. And I think a part of me decided then that love was always something you had to be ready to lose. That if you held on too tight, it would vanish just to prove it could. I carried that longer than I meant to. Into every relationship, every almost love, every conversation where I smiled a little too much and offered just enough of myself to be seen, but not enough to be known. I made leaving easy, for me and for them. Even with Alaric, even when he came back, I kept waiting for it to fall apart. Because that's what I knew. That's what I'd been taught by someone who should have stayed and didn't. But here's the thing I hadn't realized until recently. She didn't leave because of me. Her absence wasn't my fault. And maybe love doesn't disappear because you dare to trust it. Maybe it only grows in the space where you let it live. I'm not her. I'm not the woman who walks away before the goodbye. And this child, this tiny life kicking beneath my ribs, will never have to wonder why I left. They will never wait at the window, wondering if love can change its mind. I made that promise, standing barefoot in the kitchen in the middle of the night, hand over my stomach, like it was the only thing keeping me from floating away. I whispered it aloud, even though no one could hear me but the baby. "I'll stay," I said. And I meant it. Making peace with the past doesn't happen all at once. It's slow. It unravels in fragments, in smells, in shadows, in questions without answers. Sometimes I still hear her voice in my head. Sometimes I wonder if she ever looked back. But I don't linger there anymore, because now I have something to move toward, not just away from. And that changes everything. It didn't happen all at once. There was no thunderclap moment, no cinematic swell of music as I realized I was ready to love him again. To really love him. To stop preparing for the end before the beginning had even finished arriving. It was quieter than that. Smaller. And maybe that's what made it real. It looked like brushing my fingers over the edge of the mixtape he'd left behind. Like reaching for my phone to call him, then putting it down. Not out of fear, but out of patience. Waiting for my heart to beat steady before I spoke. It looked like letting myself feel the way I missed him, without turning that ache into anger. I used to think love had to be proven with grand gestures, declarations, sacrifices, promises so big they echoed. But that was before I understood what staying really looked like. What choosing someone meant when there were no guarantees. Because the truth is, I had been surviving love, enduring it, testing it, waiting for the floor to drop. That's not the same as giving yourself to it. That's not the same as letting it grow. And Alaric, he had come back. Not with fireworks. Not with words, really, but with presence. With eyes that didn't demand forgiveness before it was earned. With hands that reached, but didn't take. He gave me space. He gave me time. And I think I want to give him the same. Because maybe the bravest thing I can do now, the most honest thing, is to stop waiting for love to break and start choosing it while it's still whole. Even if it doesn't last forever. Even if it scares me. Even if I don't know what happens next. I want to love like I'm not afraid anymore. Like I've never been left behind. Like I believe in beginnings, not just endings. And maybe that starts now. Not with a kiss, not with a promise, but with a decision. One I make quietly, without needing him to see it yet. I choose to stay open. I choose to let him in. Not because I need him to save me, but because I want him beside me while I save myself. And I think if he really is who I believe he's trying to be, he'll understand. I don't need certainty. I don't need a crown. I just need to know I'm not hiding anymore. And I'm not. Not from him, not from love, not from the future. That's how I knew I was ready. Not because the fear vanished, but because it didn't get to be in charge anymore. Because the door I kept locked, I left it open that day. And for once, I didn't stand behind it, waiting for someone to leave. I stood in the light, and I stayed. It's strange how quiet strength feels. It doesn't come with adrenaline or a rush of clarity. Just stillness. Like a lake at sunrise. Like breath before words. That's what I felt, waking one morning with the weight of the baby curling low in my belly, and the sound of the world soft around me. Birds, wind through the trees, the distant hum of life I wasn't hiding from anymore. I wasn't waiting for something to go wrong. I wasn't rehearsing how I'd survive the next goodbye. For the first time and longer than I could remember, I wasn't bracing. I was just here, in it, with everything I didn't yet know and everything I did. Love had always been a kind of armor for me, or maybe a battlefield. Something I needed to win or hold or fix. Something to prepare for losing even while I clung to it. But now, I think it's simpler than that. Or maybe not simpler, just quieter. Quieter like a candle is quieter than a bonfire, and still, somehow, enough. Love is the chair pulled up next to yours at the end of a hard day. It's hands in the sink beside you, not asking for anything in return. It's someone folding your sweatshirt because they noticed you always forget. It's the feeling that you don't have to narrate your pain for someone to see it. It's presence, not noise. Not rescue, not certainty. Just presence. I used to think survival meant strength, that if I could endure the absence, outrun the grief, keep standing while the world slipped out from under me, that made me powerful. But survival is just another kind of hiding sometimes. A quieter version of disappearing. And I don't want to disappear anymore. I want to be seen. I want to see. That's what this child has taught me, before they've even opened their eyes, that love doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just the small, brave decision to stay soft in a world that taught you to be hard. To choose presence when absence is easier, to open the door again, and again, and again. Not because you're certain someone will walk through it, but because you want to be there when they do. That's the life I'm building now. One that doesn't revolve around what I'm afraid to lose, but around what I'm willing to show up for. Every day, every moment, every quiet breath. I used to think love was the end of the story. Now I know it's where the real beginning lives. And I'm ready for it. I didn't see it firsthand. I wasn't there when Alaric walked into the room he'd once been raised to believe was the center of his world. The gold ceilings, the echoing marble, the cold eyes of men who'd only ever looked at him as a calculation, never a person. But I didn't need to be, because I know what silence sounds like when someone finally tells the truth. He told me about it later, in pieces, like the story was too heavy to hold all at once. He said the council chamber felt smaller, colder. The crest above the head seat still stared down like a warning. The men around the table hadn't aged, just hardened. Like they'd been waiting not for a man to return, but for an apology. They didn't expect him to speak first, but he did. Not with ceremony, not with titles. Just open quote, "I'm not coming back." Close quote. That was it. No grand speech, no rage, just truth, plain and final. He said their silence was deafening, that some blinked, confused, like they didn't know how to process a prince who didn't want a throne. They thought it was rebellion, but it wasn't. It was peace. He told them he was stepping down, not running, not hiding, just choosing. Choosing the life that waited for him outside those walls, the one with me, with our child, and realizing it was never less than the crown. It was everything. He said his title had always felt like skin that didn't fit. Too tight, too heavy, stitched with obligations he never agreed to. And for years, he tried to wear it with quiet dignity. But silence isn't loyalty. And staying out of duty is not the same as staying out of love. He said that too, calmly, because he wasn't asking for their approval. He was simply letting them know it was done, that his life, his future, no longer belonged to that table, but to the mornings beside me and the heartbeat inside me. He told me he didn't flinch when they looked at him like he'd lost his mind. Because he hadn't. He'd found it. Finally. Not in their shadow, but in the light of something he chose. Freely. And freedom, he said, isn't loud. It's still. It's the quiet sound of armor coming off. That was the moment he stopped being their prince, not because they took the title away, but because he laid it down himself. He said when he walked out, no one followed. No one stopped him. And for the first time in his life, that was okay. Because he wasn't walking away from something. He was walking toward it, toward us. They brought us out into the light, not the kind that flatters, but the kind that exposes, every flashbulb, every lens trained on us like we were spectacle or scandal. Maybe we were. My hands trembled against Alaric's coat. The crowd was a storm I didn't yet know how to survive, but he was my tether. Not a shield, just something solid in the noise. He stepped up to the microphones. No script, no crown, just breath. And then he said steady and simple, open quote, "Lena is my family. Our child, our heir, is not a secret or a shadow. They are my future." Close quote. He didn't sound like a king. He sounded like a man who'd finally stopped lying to himself. And in that moment, I was seen, not as a scandal or a rumor, but as someone real. Someone chosen. The fear didn't disappear, but it softened. The shame, the silence, the erasure, all of it stepped back. The mixtape he made me months ago, the one full of songs he never wanted anyone else to hear, played in my mind, once private, now a revolution. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just declared it. Us. And that was enough. I wasn't watching the cameras anymore. I was watching him, the man who chose me, publicly, without hesitation. And for the first time, I believed it. Because love isn't just what you whisper in the dark. It's what you're brave enough to say under the brightest light. They say being seen is dangerous. Maybe they're right, because when I stepped out beside him that day, not as a secret, not as a ghost, I felt the whole world turn its head. I wasn't hiding behind sweaters or silence anymore. I wasn't the girl people pretended didn't exist. I stood there, breathing, trembling, alive. And I belonged. Not because he gave me space beside him, but because I took it. The crowd's eyes were sharp, hungry, but I didn't shrink. I thought of the mixtape again, those songs that once belonged only to me, and realized I'd become one of them. Raw, unguarded, true. I was saying without words, I'm here. I'm not waiting for permission. I'm done hiding. And maybe the future would still be uncertain. Maybe the kingdom would keep whispering. But I wasn't scared anymore. I was ready to be seen. I remember the smallest sound that day, the clink of metal hitting marble. Alaric had taken off his royal pin. Quietly. Deliberately. It wasn't rebellion, it was release. Then he reached for my hand, no crowns, no speeches, just skin, warmth, breath. That touch, it said everything. This is what matters. Not legacy, not titles. Us. The world blurred around us, cameras flashing, murmurs rising, and for a heartbeat, we were untouchable. We didn't walk away to applause. We just walked away, side by side. Not a prince and a commoner, just two people who finally chose each other. And I realized then, letting go of what the world expects isn't loss, it's freedom. And freedom, this time, looks like love. Now I'm here again by the window. The same dusk, the same soft gray blue sky. Only this time, I'm not waiting for anything to end. The apartment smells like rain and lavender. The baby moves, a soft flutter, shy and alive. And I let myself feel it all. Once I thought silence was safety. Now I know silence was just the space before truth. I used to be afraid of being erased, but now I know what it means to exist. Alaric's hand is still in my memory, steady, human, real. No crowns, no silk, just us. The world outside hums low and steady, and for the first time, I don't feel like I'm hiding inside it. I'm not the rumor. I'm not the mistake. I'm not the hidden girl anymore. I'm Lena. And this is where I'm meant to be. I don't fear silence anymore, because the life inside me is loud with presence. Because I'm not the hidden prince's secret, I'm the chosen one. Finally. And this is my confession.